So we are going to look at Psalm 24 this week. So the Psalms obviously have a pretty wide range of kind of what they're working with, what they're trying to do. Some of them are very personal Psalms. Some are, just kind of rough, trying to get the raw emotion across. Some are highly composed. Some are made for liturgical use, so they were being very communal. I was trying to think of, the range here, and if you guys have seen my bad little prayer book, I was going for raw emotion there. Was not going for highly composed, highly thought of, just raw connection with how me and God talk about things. This one is extremely opposite, as you were going to find. This is an incredibly well-composed piece. It was probably made for liturgical settings, probably had to do with pilgrimages, and boy, I feel like I really got lost in the weeds this week on reading about like the meter going on and how words work together. Like, this is someone who actually knew what they were doing. So appreciate the density of this poem. If nothing else, I spent a lot of the week looking at, but it is, it's an impressive piece of work, of worship for someone. The setting, like I said, was likely people coming into Jerusalem in the pilgrimage. People have also been kind of confused as to the fact it jumps around a lot on its subject matter. And then I was thinking, it's probably a lot like a triptych. You guys know those in churches, where you usually have one central image, and then to the side you have two images that may not be readily apparent what the connection is, but overall the three of them kind of work together to say something a little different than any of the single pieces could. And so I think that's what's going on in this poem. We'll start with kind of the centerpiece in verses 1 and 2, and then we'll kind of do the left and the right panels, and see what God has for us this week. So I'll read it, and then we'll kind of look at the various kind of pictures, see what we have to learn from this very dense, well-composed prayer. Psalm 24, a David psalm. The Lord's is the earth and its fullness, the world and the dwellers within it. For he on the seas did found it, and on the torrents set it firm. Who shall go up to the mount of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? The clean of hands and the pure of heart, who have given no oath in lie, and has sworn not in deceit. He shall bear blessing from the Lord, and a bounty from his rescuing God. This is the generation of his seekers, those who go out and search your presence, Jacob. Selah. Lift up your heads, O gates, and rise up, eternal portals, that the King of glory may enter. Who is the King of glory? The Lord, most potent and valiant, the Lord who is valiant in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, lift up, eternal portals, that the King of glory may enter. Who is he, the King of glory? The Lord of armies. He is the King of glory. Selah. So you guys get it all figured out there when reading? There's a lot going on in there, isn't it? Doesn't it feel like it jumps around a little bit? So let's look at the pieces and see if we can figure out what on earth we are supposed to do with this, how it was used, or how it might be helpful to us a long time after this was written. So I will argue that the centerpiece is verses 1 or 2. This is actually the main point here. The other two pieces are kind of variations on that theme. So the Lord's is the earth and its fullness. That word's very intentional. It's going to come back a little later. The Lord's is the earth and its fullness, the world and the dwellers within it. For he on the seas did found it, and on the torrents set it firm. So the main image that the poet is playing with here actually comes from kind of a different imaginative world than we have. Like when we think of the earth that we live on, right? We've been taught by science to know that it's largely just a big rock, right? That has some stuff clinging to the outer surface of it, right? So rocks, I think, have an image of stability, right? We're used to that idea. And so when we compare God to things like mountains, we might go for stability, right? God is a mountain, a cleft. It's another image that we pull from the Psalms a lot. But when this was written, the way they kind of imagined the world was, again, they didn't know about a big rock flowing through space. Their belief was that water was kept kind of above the sky in big cisterns that God could turn on sometimes so it would rain or snow or whatever. And that below the earth was also water, which also represented chaos in their mind, right? And so when things like floods happen, do you guys ever notice in the flood story, it doesn't just talk about rain, it talks about the waters coming up from the earth. Because the way they imagined the world was basically kind of this thin crust with water above and water below. And really what they're arguing is God is so strong, the fact that there's chaos all around us, the fact there's water all around us, and yet the world is stable. That shows how strong God is, that God can take even out of the midst of chaos and these things and can make a stable world. Why is the world God's? Because out of the seeming chaos, he created something that has meaning, that is stable, that's going to stick around. Why? Not because physics are important, but because God is. God is our stability, right? And so maybe for us, a more helpful way to look at this is, I think in our culture, where people do see the world as something largely accidental and meaningless. It creeps into even our Christian way of looking at the world, that it's just a thing, right? It's just this thing we live on and we use to the best we can, and we try and enjoy it, and there's some good artistry in it. But ultimately, it's just kind of a thing that was kind of accidental. That's not what the Bible says about the world, about the cosmos. God made it, he formed it, and he adores it. It doesn't say God so loved humanity that he came and gave his son. God so loved the world, right? All of the creation is beloved and meaningful and held stable because it is God's. God is what makes it safe to be here. God is what keeps it from falling apart. You know, like the scientific community just tells us how close we are to the next solar flare or asteroid killing us, right? Odd. It just hasn't happened yet statistically. Why are we not afraid of all the things that could go wrong? Because the Lord's is the earth and its fullness, the world and the dwellers within it. On the seas he found it, and on the torrents set it firm. It's okay to be here. It's safe. This is where we belong. It's home in some ways. Because this place is God's. And so that, I think, is the centerpiece of this psalm. We're going to look at the meaning of that from two different angles. But if we could get that through our heads, I can't help but wonder if we wouldn't treat the world around us a little differently. We wouldn't value it differently. We wouldn't recognize the most important things in the world are not always us and our wants and our desires, right? We're part of something bigger, something that is God's, something that we get to be part of and are privileged to be part of. So we're going to switch to one of those sides now. So the question is, if this God who rules the universe, who designs it, who holds back chaos, who gives stability, should we just strut in there into the presence of that God like it's no big deal, right? This is one of those psalms that keeps us from having buddy Jesus, thinking that Jesus is at our beck and call and he's a good friend, which he is. But he's also huge and powerful and a little dangerous, which we need to be reminded of at times as well. And so this is probably something that, these are the types of questions people would have been asking themselves on pilgrimage as they are walking into God's presence, whether that is a physical long way away, like it would have been when this was written. For us, when we're walking into a backyard to spend time in God's presence, do we ever ask ourselves who we are, who we think we are to walk into that God's presence? There's some audacity there. And I like that, by the way, because we have that right as God's children. But it's not something we need to be doing lightly. And so this gives us some questions to ask ourselves. Who's going to go up on the mount of the Lord or into God's presence? And who is going to stand up in his holy place? The clean of hands, the pure of heart, who has given no oath in a lie, and has sworn not in deceit. He shall bear blessing from the Lord and bounty from the rescuing God. This is the generation of seekers. those who seek out your presence, Jacob. So the questions are asking us again, there's two things there. Clean of hands, pure of heart, right? Clean of hands is one of their favorite metaphors for just our actions, right? Are our actions pure and whole? Have we been doing the right things with our time, our money, our efforts? And what is the state of our heart? And then we've got this kind of dense metaphor that doesn't come across very well in English. But I spent a lot of the week kind of looking at this word. It says, who's given no oath in a lie and who's sworn not in deceit. So a little kind of quick tangent. The way the Hebrew language works is they have kind of a root system. They have kind of a word that has a trait, and then things that are like that will all sound kind of the same. We've got a little bit of one in like, what is a king? Like someone who rules, right? And then what is the place they rule? It's a kingdom. But in Hebrew, what is a king? You know, someone who kings, they rule. A ruler, I guess, kind of plays on it too. What is a queen? Well, they're the female king. It's the same word. It's going to sound slightly different. What is a kingdom? A place where they rule. What is a palace? It's the place where a king is. The words would all kind of sound the same. So it's interesting. You can kind of see what in their minds were related to one another. So the word for soul and neck, for instance, are very similar words. I don't associate my soul with my neck, right? But they did, because for them, God's presence represented breath. What do you breathe through? Your throat and your neck, right? What shows that you're still alive? Your breath. And so it's interesting the way they think. So the reason I bring all this up is this idea of deceit, this idea who's sworn no oath on a lie. These words and a whole bunch of other ones have the basic root of emptiness, of hollowness. We say one thing, but it's hollow, it's empty. We don't actually mean it, right? We are, saying, I swear an oath, yes, I promise I'll be there for you, I'll take you, I'll return your texts, right? That's who I am. I say I'm doing these things, but the hollowness comes in the emptiness. I'm just talking. I have no intention of doing it. This is, in fact, one of the, just things that seems to make God the angriest. In fact, it's the same root word that comes up in the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20. Do not use the Lord's name as if it were of no significance. Do not use it in vain. Don't associate God's name with emptiness, is another way of saying that. For the Lord won't forgive anyone who uses his name that way. And so to me, that was kind of an interesting insight, because, I just never understood why that's in the Ten Commandments. Like just saying the Lord's name in vain. The way it gets used in a lot of churches, right? Someone goes, oh God. Like, oh, you just broke one of the Ten Commandments. It's just like, God doesn't strike me as that petty, right? But that's where that comes with. He's saying, look, do not associate God with emptiness, because there's one thing God is good at, it's fullness. What God says he's going to do, he follows through. And so if we want to know what it's like to walk into that God's presence, we're asking ourselves, are my actions empty? Are my actions hollow, or are they the things that I said I was going to do? Do they fit with what I believe, with how God would have me do things? Don't associate God with emptiness, with hollowness, because that is not who he is. That is not who we are called to be, right? And so as we walk into God's presence, who gets to go? Clean of hands, pure of heart, those who haven't given an oath in a lie and have not sworn in deceit. We're not deceiving. We're not claiming to do something when we have no intention of it. We're not curating our Facebook profile to say we are smarter and wiser and more put together than we actually are. Right? We're just us. We're not empty. We're not hollow, because that is not who God is. And importantly, when we do that, why do we walk into God's presence, right? This isn't just an abstract religious thing, because that's what you're supposed to be when you hang out with God. Because those are the people that are going to bear blessing from the Lord and bounty from the rescuing God. And that's a play on fullness. Remember at the very beginning? The Lord is the earth's and its fullness. And so if we find ourselves empty, we find ourselves as liars, and hollow and not following through the things we said we're going to as much as we mean to? Is it try harder? Or is it go into God's presence and let him fill us? Because he is the God of wholeness. He's the God of blessing. And that's the implication of the word there. God fills that which is empty, including you and I. Come and be whole. Come and be filled. Because that's who God is. That bless. And then the last line there is, I think, an identity. Those who seek and receive blessing from God, this is the generation of seekers, those who search out your presence. Jacob. It's probably in there to remind this group of people as pilgrims who they are. They're part of a bigger cluster of people, a group of people whose identity is to receive blessings from the God who blesses, the God who fills. We are no longer just a group of random people. We are no longer empty or deceitful. We are those who've been filled. We are those who have received blessing, so we think of ourselves a little bit differently. And then we shift to the other part of the triptych. Lift up your heads, O gates, and rise up, eternal portals. The King of glory may enter. Who's the King of glory? The Lord, most potent and valiant, the Lord who is valiant in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, lift up, eternal portals, that the King of glory may enter. Who is he, the King of glory? The Lord of armies. He is the King of glory. So the image probably being played on here is, at the time there was kind of a tradition when the king came back home. They would have this kind of ceremony of inviting them back into their home and kind of singing their praises as a victorious, because what's the king's main job? Win battles. It's not to tell people what to do. Your job is to protect everyone and win battles. So they're probably playing on that image. The idea, of course, is the pilgrims have just gone in, right? Into God's presence. And now who's being invited in? The King of glory, the King of the cosmos, the one who's made stability and has filled that which is empty, right? And it's an interesting kind of way of thinking about it, because I think there's a tension throughout the whole Bible of God is not just in the temple, in sacred places. They're going to fight that one all the way down, because that was really in the worldview back then. It still kind of haunts our thinking, right? God is everywhere. But apparently he's more some places than other places. It's a weird tension, right? But what is it that makes God more other places? Is it inherently holy? Is it a more special place? And I think it's right here. It's where he's invited. The cosmic King of glory, the most powerful being we can ever possibly imagine, so happens to be very kind and courteous, right? He will not force his way in. He wants to be invited in. King Jesus says, I'm knocking at the door. I'm not going to kick the thing in, although he surely could, right? And I think we get that here as well. Lift up your gates, O head, rise, that the King of glory may enter. He could just force his way into our lives and into our world, and yet he desires to be invited back into his home. Whether that's a backyard or a sanctuary of a beautiful church, whether it's our little hearts, he says, come on in. That's when the King of glory is willing to enter. And this image of, lift up your heads, O gates, and rise, eternal portals, that the King of glory. It says it a couple times in there, lift up your heads, O gates. And I was stuck on that for a while, till one of the things I was reading said, well, of course the gates and things have to get a little bigger. God's so huge, right? Inviting God in is always going to stretch us. It always needs to be a little bigger. It always needs to hurt a little bit when he comes on in, because we tend to have too small ideas of God, right? And so is there something a little bit dangerous about inviting the cosmic King who made and owns the world in? Of course there is. But he comes in because he thinks we are capable of more of his presence, more of his strength, more of his filling, receiving more of his blessing than we currently are. And so, of course, He is going to stretch us. His home is always going to be stretched in our hearts, in our presence, in our communities. He's just too big. We need to be stretched. We need to have the gates lift up a little bit so He can squeeze on through. And then who knows, maybe the next time He goes out and squeezes on in, they get a little bigger. The capacity's a little bit bigger. So what I saw in this psalm, some good questions for us, but we need to remind ourselves that the earth is God's, not ours. That includes us. The earth and fullness are God's. On seas, on chaos, on seeming meaninglessness, He founded it and He set it. So let's ask ourselves again. Are there places of emptiness, the things we do, the things we think about, spend our time looking towards them? Are we willing to have God fill those places, to seek His blessing, knowing it is going to change our identity? We don't get to be who we were before. Knowing it's going to stretch us because we're capable of holding more blessing, more of His presence, being a bigger home to God than we think we can. This also isn't just a group of people inviting God into a temple, right? They're inviting Him back home into a city full of everyday life. God's presence can be invited into our places of work, our neighborhoods, our homes, our frustrations, our hobbies, because He wants to bless those things and stretch them and show us what they are capable of. Will we trust? Will we let Him stretch us? Will we invite the dangerous cosmic king in? Because He's about abundance and fullness. And He knows we can handle more than we tend to give ourselves credit for.